Hi guys! We're starting off with a pop quiz today. Take a look at the following picture and tell me which of the animals you think is most likely to survive and why. So which is it? If you said you think the goat is most likely to survive because it's bandaged, you're right. Everyone knows a wounded animal has a slim chance for survival, especially out in the wilderness. Open cuts equals flies and other nasty insects, equals infections, equals disease, equals bodily deterioration, equals dead. End of story. Or in other words, open wounds can kill you. Let's take another look at the picture. I want to know which of the animals you relate to the most and why. Are you the wolf who's cleaning its wound? It's still self-soothing. It's not good to go. The lioness who's wounded but acts like it's no big deal. No, she thinks she's good to go. The rhino whose wound is so bad it can't go. Or the goat who's gotten help with bandaging his wound and is good to go. In my intro video, I talk about a concept called the spiritual formation. If you haven't seen it yet, I'll link it because it explains in depth how I approach that concept. But in short, I define spiritual formation as the process of finding someone important to be and something important to do. As humans, we have those needs to be someone important and to do something important, at least in our circle of influence. And so we have a need for spiritual formation, or for figuring out who it is we want to be and what it is we want to do. It's always tempting to just jump right into talking about our future, where we want to be in 5 years, the things we want to have done by then. But have you ever noticed that no matter how well thought out and planned your future is, you end up running in the same circles you've been running in since you can remember? So as tempting as it is to get right to it so we can feel productive, we're going to go back to the beginning. We're going to take a look at how our story begins so we can understand why it's unfolding the way it is in those annoying circles. For many, if not all of us, we're going to start with the first plot twist in our story. It features something called the wound, or I define it as an emotional and mental grievance that was inflicted on us in our early childhood years. This is what we're going to talk about over the next couple of videos. As always, let's break it down before we begin so that we're all on the same page. First of all, the wound is part emotional because at the time it happened, and to this day, it triggers an emotional or a gut response from us. This means we might respond to it without thinking twice. An emotional response to a wound looks different for everyone. It might feel like an increase in heart rate, sweaty palms, or chest pain. It might look like avoiding eye contact, restlessness, or clenched fists. It might sound like short, shallow breaths, stammering, or an increase in volume when speaking. Whatever it looks like for us, when something hits close to the wound, our mind remembers what we went through emotionally back then and reacts to similar situations in the present. Second, the wound is also part mental because at the time it happened, it introduced what's called a cognitive distortion or a flawed thought that we have since believed and built our lives around. While there are several cognitive distortions we may believe about ourselves and our circumstances, the cognitive distortion that came from the wound is foundational. That means a lot, if not most, of our identity and thoughts about who we are stem from it. Because so much of what we believe about ourselves is rooted in the single cognitive distortion, it's often hard for us to believe anything else about ourselves or even realize that what we're thinking about isn't true. Unless we're intentional about creating a new story for ourselves, we'll continue to believe the flawed one we've been telling ourselves this whole time because of that cognitive distortion way back then. Third, the wound is a grievance because at the time it happened, and for many of us, to this day, it causes us pain or distress. Wounds in general are common. We get hurt on a regular basis. That's just fact. But the wound I'm talking about is the wound. The one you got when you had your first experience with shame. And that's why it causes you as much pain and distress as it does, because it was probably the first time you felt shame. Chances are good you remember it. What happened, who you were with, where you were, maybe even what you were wearing. Now, to be clear, shame is not guilt. Guilt is the feeling we experience when we feel bad about something we do. Guilt says, I did something bad, and I feel bad about it. Little kids experience guilt. My almost 2-year-old, when she pinches her sister, her baby sister, she knows she did something she wasn't supposed to, and she has the capacity to feel bad about it, or to feel guilt because she hurt her sister. Shame is the feeling we experience when we feel bad about who we are. Shame says, I am someone bad, and I feel bad about it. Little kids aren't wired to experience shame yet. They haven't developed the cognitive capacity for it. Take my 3-year-old, for example. He's a chunky kid. If we tell him he's fat, he laughs, shakes his belly, and says he loves being fat. Now put me in the same situation. If you tell me I'm fat, I'm going to take it personally and probably feel depressed about it for the next week. Kids don't normally develop the capacity to experience shame until they hit age 5. For most of us, that's the reason why our wounds happen in early childhood. That's when we begin to realize we're not the fastest or the smartest or the tallest kid. And as a result, that's when we start to not like who we are, and we experience shame for the first time in our lives. Shame, in full debut intensity, caused the grievance that marked a wound as the wound. Shame was, and likely is, still the basis for the pain or distress we experience today, every time something comes too close to the wound. Finally, the wound was inflicted on us. That means we didn't cause it. We were hurt by another human being, whether intentionally or not. Believing this is critical to healing from the wound. What happened to us was not our fault. But before we jump to the blame game, it's also critical to remember that while the blame for your wound lays on the perpetrator is wounded just as well. Hurt people is the saying. And until someone in the cycle changes by healing from that hurt people will continue to hurt people. I've thrown a lot of information at you, so let's go over the main points. 1. Spiritual formation is the process of finding someone important to be and something important to do. 2. Spiritual formation is one of the distinguishing characteristics of humanity. It's what makes us who we are. 3. A foundational part of spiritual formation is the wound. The wound is an emotional and mental grievance that was inflicted on us in our early childhood years. This means someone did something that hurt us deeply emotionally and introduced a cognitive distortion we have believed and built our lives around since. Because this happened when we were young and vulnerable, we thought there was something wrong with who we were, not with what happened to us. And as a result, we experienced shame. And shame, based on the wound, became an integral part of the story we tell about ourselves. That scarlet letter that makes us feel ugly and not good enough and unwanted. 4. We cannot live the life we want to live until we've taken care of the wound. The important person we want to be, the important things we want to do, they can't be done while we're bleeding out. We need to tend to the wound. This week, when you have the chance, make a list of events you think might be your wound. And it's okay to have as many as you think of. That's fine. The next time we get together, we'll take a closer look at what's included in the wound to see what role it played in making us the people we are today. See you soon.